This podcast is brought to you by the Center for Educational Innovation. Since 1989, the CEI has helped shift school systems towards authentic, from the ground up improvement, turning under-resourced schools into engines of opportunity and impact. TeacherGuard thanks you for your proud sponsorship and support. Teaching is hard, and oftentimes it isn't what happens in the classroom that makes the job difficult. It's what happens before and after school, during passing periods, at lunch, in meetings, or in our lives outside of school that challenges our ability to stick with the profession. TeacherGuard is committed to focusing on making teaching sustainable and enjoyable. We want to make the rewards of the profession seem more attainable and the challenges more bearable. Our mentorship model pairs teachers with consistent daily support from a peer educator. Through TeacherGuard's 4 sustainability principles, we will walk the challenging times with you and allow you to enjoy the wins and celebrations that come with this beautiful profession. See teacherguard.net for more information and to explore how you can join our community of educators today. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. All right, joining me today is Dr. Cheryl Forbes. Really excited to have her on the podcast. Someone who I've known for quite some time, going back to the very beginning of my career. Welcome in, Dr. Forbes. We'd like to start off by just giving folks a little bit of context about your background in the profession.
Well, thanks, Adam. It's always a pleasure to get to see you again and keep up with your progress. I became a teacher many years ago, but it was not the first thing I ever thought I would find myself doing. I'd had the opportunity, I was a Spanish major in college, and I'd had the opportunity to live in Spain for a little while as a student. And during that time, I think I was 19 years old, I taught classes, and I didn't have any preparation or training. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any materials. I was supposed to be teaching English, and a lot of the kids already knew. It was in Barcelona. A lot of the kids already knew a great deal of English informally. And it was an after school class. So as you can imagine, it was pretty challenging, and that left me thinking like, oh no, teaching is not for me. So I originally went to the University of California, where I met you, and was pursuing a PhD in Spanish literature, which, I really enjoyed. But I started teaching as a teaching assistant then, and I realized, I actually really do like teaching. Maybe it's just adults, but I liked it, And at the same time, my roommate was getting her bilingual credential to teach elementary school. So I started going to visit some of her classes and decided that that's what I wanted to do, really. I wanted to work with young people and be able to learn from them about culture and language. At the same time, I, could help them learn academic content and social skills. So I was a bilingual teacher, elementary school, for about 15 years. And then for the last 30 years of my career, I got the privilege of teaching at the university, where I worked with young people like you were, and who were in the process of becoming teachers, as well as undergraduates who were learning about education or educational issues, and graduate students who came back to do their advanced degrees. So I retired from that career just a couple of years ago, and right now I'm still volunteering in elementary school near where I live, and working with some kids who are newcomers. So I get to work with some elementary age kids again, in Spanish and in English, as they're acquiring skills and getting started at school in the U.S.
Can't stay away, huh?
No, but it's only a couple hours a week.
There you go.
That I can do.
What a career. And so a lot of the time that you spent in the field was working with new teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you saw and experienced yourself in teaching a lot of the challenges that new teachers face in the profession. And so there's no secret about attrition rate and how challenging
Mm-hmm.
those first few years are just to sustain and remain in the profession.
Mm-hmm.
So over the course of your time, and it might have changed maybe from when you were teaching to towards the end of your career when you were about to retire, but what would you say are 1 or 2 maybe factors, situations, things that you feel challenge new teachers in staying in the profession the most?
Well, I think we didn't have a lot of support when I was a new teacher, for example. We didn't have mentors, we didn't have induction, we didn't have any kind of formal support. But you always found those teachers, or at least I did. I was fortunate to do that. Found those teachers in the building who, you could go to with questions, or they could give you feedback. So I've really seen in my time with new teachers, and people who are in training, how important that kind of feedback, non-evaluative feedback, as well as constructive suggestions at different points in time. Both of those things were really important, because when a person only receives sort of ambiguous feedback, they can get frustrated and not really know how to make any progress, and then it's difficult
Mhm.
for them to really feel confident and develop their skills. On the other hand, if it's too much evaluative feedback, and especially too soon, then that can also be can make people become discouraged, and also lack of confidence in their own ability to learn and their skills. So I think the individual contact, whether it's I during the pandemic, and in various ways of using technology in our program over the years, I realized that we could do some of this through video conferencing, through video feedback sessions where people tape themselves and then look at that with a mentor. That
Mhm.
was something that I discovered with some of my student teachers years ago, when they were struggling a little bit. Sometimes I encourage them to make a video and only watch it themselves. This was something they did in my school district, actually, when I was teaching. And then to reflect on that and talk to me about what they saw. And it was pretty revealing, actually.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a positive innovation. But the other thing that I think has I know impacted the attrition rate, besides the fact that teachers are not paid enough and have to do too much buying of materials and supporting their professional growth through their own pocket. But the amount of autonomy that teachers have to use professional judgment is something that can be a big challenge in really top-down district curriculum. Especially that was true during the heavy accountability movements like No
Mhm.
Child Left Behind. But I see this in the schools now, that I happen to be in a school where teachers are using a lot of creativity. But then I go to visit some other schools, and you don't have that same feeling that they're able to exercise their own judgment and professional understanding, in some cases. And that can, you know, that's that can be very deadening as a teacher, I think.
Well, and in a way, both things that you mentioned kind of feed into each other, right? If you are not receiving feedback
Hmm.
uh, frequently enough, or quality feedback, then you may have some autonomy that you didn't even know you had, but you are
Right.
uncertain about it, and so you don't take chances that you otherwise
Right.
may. Or vice versa, you may think that you have more autonomy than you
Yeah.
actually do, and then
Yeah.
you're not getting the feedback to kind of fix some of
Right.
that. So there's
Right.
ties between the two factors that you brought up.
Oh, I think there definitely are. And I know one thing that my colleagues and I were always very clear about with our student teachers in particular, who were just going into the field, is don't use only your own autonomy. There's some curriculum
Yeah.
out there that's good, and you should be
Right.
using that, especially as you're learning. You're not
Yeah.
really like experimenting on kids, young people. So
Yeah.
those are the kind of things that it is, like you say, it's a balance. It's like a dance, between
Hmm.
autonomy and following some principles and best practices, and
Yeah.
getting feedback on that.
Yeah. I mean, to the first point that you brought up, I think back to my experience, and I'm not saying this because you were in charge of the program when I was there, but I feel like UCSD's preparation program was phenomenal. And I remember the year that I was getting my credential, I was an intern, and I was almost, I don't want to say annoyed or overwhelmed, but the amount of eyes that were on my in my classroom and on my teaching throughout the year was really intimidating, right? Like, and that
Yeah,
was without even being a student teacher. So I didn't have someone there
right.
every day, but just knowing that my supervisor was going to come in
Yeah,
occasionally to watch me and to provide feedback, knowing that to get my credential, I had to videotape myself, watch it with some of my peers. There's just a lot of reflection time, a lot of feedback,
Mm-hmm.
which then the minute or the second that my second year teaching started, I didn't realize how valuable that was until I didn't have it anymore. Because you go from so much feedback
Mm-hmm.
about how you're doing to absolutely nothing.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, at first it was kind of like, great, I don't have anybody that's gonna,
Freedom.
I feel like I can mess up now, right? Because
Right,
then I
right,
won't be
right,
embarrassed or anything like
right.
that. But over time, you miss that. You miss the veteran supervisor giving
Mm-hmm.
you some feedback. You miss going as draining as it was to finish interning or student teaching and then going to your classes at night. You miss that community that you had with your peers who
Mm-hmm.
were trying to get the same credential, going through the same struggles you were. And depending on the community that you end up with at your school,
Mm-hmm.
I 100% can see how all of those, it's like those scaffolds just completely
Mm-hmm.
were demolished in
Right.
a matter of months. And and to your point, um, while there are, induction programs and programs that help you have to clear your credential to continue some of that, nothing is as involved as your credentialing program.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder sometimes, is 1 year enough uh
Mm-hmm.
to get
Uh-uh.
ready to be thrown out into
Uh-uh.
the field? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's an interesting, that's a really interesting question that I think about a little more right now because I'm in a state where people actually spend their entire undergraduate education on education and becoming a teacher.
Oh wow.
So in order to be licensed in this state, you have to have a degree in education. Just the opposite of California, where for quite some time you couldn't have a degree in education.
Yeah.
That's changed a little bit now with education sciences as a major, for example, like we have at UCSD.
Hmm.
And so everything was, the idea in California was that you would have deep disciplinary knowledge, which is certainly important.
Hmm.
And I think is a benefit, of that system in California is that people did have, and particularly in science, I really think about that, had that time to develop that deep disciplinary knowledge. But 1 year, no, it's really not
Yep.
sufficient postgraduate like that. So,
Right.
I know that that was a lot of why the regulations around induction were put into place is because professionals knew that that wasn't enough time and that a different kind of an approach would be needed for in-service teachers, but that they shouldn't just like have this intensive experience and then go to
Yeah.
nothing the next year. And school districts, it's a struggle for them to be able to provide all of that within their own. They don't have the capacity necessarily, not all school districts, to provide that kind of support for new teachers.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many students, so many teachers,
Yeah.
administrators are overwhelmed, right? It isn't any one person's fault that the kind
Nope.
of the system that we've created is
Mm-hmm.
not always the most supportive. And I'm curious that you're in Kansas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Mm-hmm.
okay? So I wonder, and you may not know off the top of your head, but I wonder what the comparison would be like between attrition rate for new teachers there compared to California or other states where you don't essentially become a full professional
Right.
with an undergraduate degree in teaching.
Well, sadly, I'm not. I don't have the data to back this up, but my
Hmm.
anecdotal kind of impressions are that it's really not that different. I think
Oh
nationwide
wow.
statistics on teacher retention are fairly consistent across settings. I think California does have perhaps some stronger programs because of the induction requirement, but it certainly hasn't. Even that has not. If that's the you know elite
Yeah.
model, even that has not really moved the needle enough on really encouraging people to stay in the profession. And so when I hear people talk about issues here, some of the teachers who have left the classroom, I haven't met too many of them here, and personally, but the issues that I hear people talking about are really the same ones that I heard in
Mm.
California. Some of it has to do with pay. particularly, for people who want to be able to, it's much more affordable to live here than it is to live in California. But
Yeah.
even then, teachers can struggle with affording, to have a life the way that they thought that teaching would be a pathway or a way to continue being middle class. And that doesn't always work out. Um, so, there's some financial pressures. And then I think also the perceived or real lack of support, for professional growth and for um, helping kids with all of the traumas and the issues that are affecting. We're the district where I am volunteering is a large urban district. It's the largest one in the state. And it has a lot of the same, kinds of issues that are facing many other urban districts and small districts where kids have been, facing traumas and teachers feel that they can't do enough to help
Mm.
sometimes. So I think those kind of that emotional aspect of that can be really tiring.
So maybe it just comes down to teaching is hard, right?
Teaching is
And
hard.
so no matter whether it's 1 year that you're preparing for it or a whole
Right.
undergraduate career, uh, you end up in that same classroom on your own, and the degree
Hmm.
to which you remain alone oftentimes, unfortunately, falls on
Hmm.
your own
Right.
agency to either
Right.
seek out professional development, community
That's right.
within your school, and who has the time to do that as a new teacher when you're already
Hmm.
not making enough money, so you're probably leaving that job to go to a second job.
That's increasingly true.
Right. And so to add to that, like, hey, on top of your two jobs, try to find a time to get deeper
Yeah.
connected to your
Right.
to your
Right.
peers and to the work. It's just
Right. Without
it
it
doesn't
feeling
seem
like just
feasible.
another assignment. I didn't mean to interrupt, but without it
But
feeling
yeah,
like just another assignment.
right. Yeah, in a meaningful kind of way. And so,
Hmm.
I mean, I think of teachers that stick it out, for lack of a better phrase, right? And I
Hmm.
think a lot of the times it's because they say it's the kids, right? The idea
Right.
that, very connected to the kids, that sometimes overrules working in
Yeah.
a not great environment or not a super sustainable one. Or sometimes it's my peers, right? There are folks here that I really
Hmm.
like. I love my department. I love my department
Right.
chair. Admin
Right.
isn't great, and so thinking about things like that, folks that if you can think of maybe folks that you thought were considering at one point leaving the profession, but then
Hmm.
something brought them back in,
Mm.
would it be those things, or can you think of other things that maybe come to mind that changed somebody's mind, so to speak?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I am thinking right now about a young man that I know that left the profession for a while and has recently returned, um,
Mm,
and now is finding it much more rewarding. Um, and I think maybe has just found the age group of kids. Perhaps I think this individual's working now with kids that were a little bit younger than the ones that the person was working with before. Maybe it's a school environment, like you say, that's so critical to find those school environments where you can, you feel you're supported and that you can still grow. And so
mm,
I've seen like almost 100. Well, it is 180 degree shift because the
yeah.
person left the profession and is now back.
Wow.
We'll see if they can actually get a full time job. That's part of the other
Hmm.
challenge, right? Some people are still having a hard time, even in California, finding um, full time employment as a teacher, the secondary level in particular.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it's going to get any better anytime soon.
No.
Recent conference that I went to, they were speaking about how a lot of people are leaving the state, right? And with families,
Hmm.
leaves
Hmm.
students, and with students, leaves money for teachers.
Well, and
So,
I mean, declining enrollment has been a problem for a while in California. In fact, the
yeah.
elementary school where I first started teaching in Imperial Beach just closed. It had been in business for 70 years and it
Yeah.
just closed. They had a memorial, kind of like
Wow.
a wake for the school site because I think it'll be torn down and they're probably going to develop it in some way, the city. So,
Well, and the irony with that, right, is that there's declining enrollment during the time, at least in California, and I know it's happening in other states as well, but in California in particular, there's probably the most options that you've ever had
Mhm.
for schooling,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Whether it's private, public, charter, non-charter.
Mhm.
And so now you're in a system or in an
Yep.
environment where you have so much school choice, but
Right.
what the declining enrollment is going to do is create competition, create
Mhm.
animosity between traditional and non-traditional
Mhm.
schools because you're now all fighting for the same students, presumably,
For the same
which then
resources.
for the
Mhm.
same resources, right? And so what that presumably does is the ones who are going to struggle the most are going to be obviously the
Mhm.
students because the choice is limited, but
Mhm.
now the teachers, if it was already
Right.
difficult before, right, to gain
Mhm.
access to communities, now with schools that you maybe were gravitated towards because you were seeking a different type of
Mhm.
environment,
Mhm.
you were happier there. Now you're kind of pushed back to the traditional route,
Mhm.
and maybe that makes you leave the entire profession.
Right.
And so it really is to the point that you made earlier. I mean, it's just a complex system with so many
Mhm.
different pitfalls
Mhm.
where our new teachers unfortunately have avenues to leave, and all connected, I guess,
Well, and I
to
think,
resources.
you have you had what you just described is a very complex understanding of educational institutions and how they operate. And if I might presume, some of that you might have begun to learn about during your undergraduate years at UCSD, because
Yeah.
that was a built-in aspect of the program, was
Mm-hmm.
that undergraduate foundations of learning courses,
Mm-hmm.
which were different than in many other fifth year programs in California that were only for that fifth year and
Mm-hmm.
then postgraduate year, and didn't have those undergraduate foundations. And so, I think it is, teachers really do have to have a sociological
Yeah.
underpinning, I think, in order to navigate the systems and to keep, that bigger perspective that you just articulated.
Well, and I think what it gave me was a reason to give whatever environment I was working for, am working for, the benefit of the doubt, and
Mm,
to feel like if I ever feel unsupported, if I ever feel
mhm,
like, this might not be the place for me, it might not be because they're not trying to make it the place for me. It might just
mhm.
be because there are factors beyond my local administration's control, the
Right,
greater district's
right.
control, and I happen to be caught in
Mhm,
the crossfire of whatever political battle is happening.
mhm,
And again, without that understanding, without that perspective, it could have been
mhm.
really easy for me to just say, forget this,
Yeah.
like this is not the environment for me and it's not going to get any better. And I don't care whose fault it is, I'm leaving.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Well, and at the end of the
but
day, that still may be the way, somebody may still make that decision, but it'll be an informed one and not just a reaction or distress.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's something that we often talk about with some of the teachers that we mentor, the idea of there is no such thing as a, abrupt or rash decision, uh, that is not informed by months, years of stuff that happened,
Mhm,
right? There's a coach that works with me and he says, or he asked me once, would you say that everything a person does or says makes sense? And at first I
hmm.
thought the question was silly. And then later the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, everything a person does or say makes sense if you look deeply enough into all of the
Mhm,
circumstances that led that person to make or say
mhm,
whatever they said or did. And with our teachers, that's, I think, what any kind of mentorship program,
mhm,
any kind of support program needs to look at. What are all the inputs? And then
mhm,
how is that leading to a potential decision for that teacher to either stay
mhm.
or leave the profession? And it's challenging when you have thousands, millions of different teachers and thousands, millions of
Yeah,
different environments to kind of narrow it down to like, all right, this is what
yeah.
we're going to do. Right. Um, and so all of the stuff that we've spoken about kind of brings to mind there's four principles that the teacher guard program uses, but the one that I think we've kind of touched on just naturally in our conversation is this idea of embracing uncertainty,
Mhm,
that we really push with new teachers. This idea of you're not going to know everything about
Mm-hmm.
everyone and what everybody may be thinking or presuming, and that is okay. Work to be okay not knowing things because our brains are
Yeah.
great at filling in
Yeah.
gaps with assumptions, and that can lead us to make those decisions that we then think later,
Yeah.
like, oh, well, that was probably premature. What are your thoughts about that? The idea of being okay with not knowing something versus trying your hardest to be as informed as possible about everything all the time.
Yeah. Well, and teachers, a lot of people that go into teaching kind of gravitate toward it because they were good students. Sometimes that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes people, I was actually not a really very good student at many points in my life. And I think that is what led me to be more interested in education and kind of righting the wrongs or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out how to do it better. But on the other hand, if you can't be okay with uncertainty, then you'll just constantly be frustrated. It's like that Sisyphus, right?
Yeah.
You're pushing the rock and it's always going to be coming back at you
Mm-hmm.
if it's just locked in that
Yeah.
dynamic. It makes me think when I was a student teacher, and my student teaching program was quite different. It was at a different university. That's all I'll say. And we had some wonderful faculty, but it just wasn't based on the same type of approach that we had at UCSD when we were just talking about having had that undergraduate foundation in anthropology and sociology of education. So a lot of it was very practical. And that was fine, but we didn't often talk about these kind of larger framing issues. And I remember one of our instructors one time said, don't you just wish you could read every child's mind? Wouldn't that be wonderful? And I don't know, it didn't really, it kind of went past me, but one of my friends was like, no, that's just horrible. That's invasive. we
Yeah.
don't, we don't need to be prying into all of our students. We need to figure out how to engage them and motivate them. But she perceived it as sort of like a controlling thing, and I think there is
Mhm.
some of that teachers feel, to try to manage all that uncertainty that is inherent in any group of individuals, whether they're 6 or 16 or 60.
Yeah.
You want to try to control as much as you can in order so that chaos doesn't just ensue. But
Right.
and you want to know the kids deeply, or the participants, the students, as much as possible, but you have to be open to the fact that you won't ever know everything.
Right. And that I remember thinking, and maybe this is just something that I grew out of, but especially when I first entered the professional world, I used to think people that have more experience than me, people that are leaders,
Mhm.
administrators, whatever, they have all the answers and they
Right.
figured everything out, right? And
Right.
so what they say is fact all the time, and
Mhm.
I need to be okay with that. And then just getting older, being
Mhm.
in, experiencing different things lends me to realize a lot of the times, most of the times actually, the folks who are leading schools were teachers
Yeah.
just a few years ago, and teachers that went through maybe an admin program
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
get their credential, but essentially what you'd become as an administrator is a business manager. You're now
Mhm.
running a school in the same way that you would run a business, and you gain very little in terms of business education in
Mhm.
your admin
Mhm.
programs. And
Yeah.
so that is something, again, not to belittle what they do, but it helps teachers understand, if you get a
Mhm.
look from somebody from an administrator that walked by your classroom at a certain time and you are not certain what that look meant, it is
Mm.
okay to just not think about it anymore.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
what Adam would do is he would take that look, and if it wasn't a smile, the rest of my day was ruined because I
Yeah.
thought my class was bad and that they saw something that they didn't like.
Mhm.
And you couple enough of those experiences over time,
Mhm.
I've fabricated a whole world in my mind now where I'm a really bad teacher and I need to
Mhm.
get ahead of leaving this before I get fired or before I don't get my
Mm.
contract renewed or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, and again, that might just be me, but I don't think that
Mhm.
I'm alone in that kind of creating
Mhm.
scenarios based on limited information.
Right.
And one of the other principles that Teacher Guard focuses on that's related to this is this idea of innovation timing. One of the things that I loved about
Mm.
UCSD's program, and other experiences professionally that I encountered throughout my career, is this idea of like what we talked about earlier with autonomy, right? Trying new things and being
Mhm.
okay with taking risks and doing all that. Where I think sometimes you can get a mismatch between a teacher, especially a young teacher who has a lot of new ideas and wants to try new things. And especially, like you said earlier, if they were a good student and you're used to kind of getting that reward anytime that
Right.
you do something, and the minute or the first time that you pitch a new idea at a department meeting or directly to your administrator and you don't get the applause that you are used to
Yeah.
getting, that is ironically also a
Mhm.
contributor sometimes to people saying like, ah, whatever. They don't understand
Right.
my ideas. They don't care about improving. I'm
Right.
out of here. What are
Right.
what are your thoughts about that extreme?
Well, and especially if they're also getting that in from kids, from students, right?
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, just the
Mm-hmm.
ordinary teenage, you know, they might be really digging whatever you're doing, but they may not want to let you know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then if
Absolutely.
you take that and then, somebody's still looking for more affirmation and doesn't find it in the adults around them, then you can see why they get discouraged and bored
Mm-hmm.
even. So
Yeah.
I think, having that ability to be, self actualized or, kind of
Yeah.
regulate your own emotions enough that you can manage some of those situations. I mean, we're teaching kids how to regulate their emotions now a lot more, I think. Um, I
Yeah.
think it's really important for teachers to also work on that and to be able to get the communication skills to ask that principal or who, or the
Mm-hmm.
other, you know, people around who you may feel are not being supportive, like, ask about, be curious,
Yeah.
find out what it is that, what do they think about your practice?
Yeah. Well, and I think about our high schoolers now, our 14 to 18-year-olds, let's say, that in 4 to 8 years might be teachers. And right
Yeah.
now they're growing up in an environment where you need that validation, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
because of the prevalence of social media or whatever other
Oh yeah.
factor is going into getting that consistent, like, attaboy, uh, that's going to hit a hard
Yeah.
wall when they step into a classroom and they let the two, three loudest students who may not be representative of what the other 27 students in that
Mm-hmm.
classroom think of the lesson kind of dictate how they felt their day
Exactly.
went.
Yeah.
Um, is that what you were talking
Oh,
about in terms
that's
of,
that I can relate to that, and I experienced that myself, especially as a, beginning teacher. I had
Mhm,
6th grade. It's one of those, I mean, I love teaching 6th graders, but
yeah,
I also am aware that people either really kind of, like to teach middle school age or they really don't. And part of it I
mhm,
think is that reason. It would be very easy to get caught up in those a couple of, loudest, maybe charismatic even kind of
yeah,
kids, and not and overgeneralize from their responses that that's what everyone else is thinking, or just trying to manage that. Some of it for me was that I just didn't have a lot of good classroom community strategies. That's why I
mhm,
was so excited about going to UCSD, where I saw from my own student teachers, I saw a lot more of that kind of work going on.
mhm.
Because I first learned about the UCSD program actually from student teachers in my own classroom. I was their
Oh, wow.
master teacher, right? Or cooperating teacher, to use the
Mhm,
UCSV term. So, I think, it would be very, especially like you mentioned with social media and that instantaneous kind of feedback that we get. I mean, you press something in your calendar, you get like a little buzz of dopamine. I,
yes,
I just
yeah,
experienced that myself a few minutes ago, and I realized, there's so much that social media is creating for the young people in the classrooms, and then, like you say, they're right moving into teaching that um, was not a factor when I was even supervising student teachers myself.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's only going to get, um I was gonna say worse, but I mean there's positive aspects too, but it's only
Hmm.
going to become more aggravated over the next
Right.
few years, right? With the rise of
Right.
AI and as a lot of what we do gets more and more automated.
Hmm.
Um, Ironically, I think a lot of the things that UCSD teaches from the standpoint of I don't feel like we got a ton of direct classroom management
Mm-mm.
uh instruction, if any. I think that the premise of a lot of what we learned was classroom management kind of begins with lesson design. If your
Hmm.
lesson is geared
Hmm.
towards the interests of the students, and you're keeping them in mind as you are designing your
Hmm.
classes, uh, you're doing preventative classroom management in
Hmm.
that way. And that's something that I think, thinking about AI, it will never be able to remove
Mm-mm.
that human element of you
Right.
may be able to produce in an instant a beautiful biology lesson plan for the
Hmm.
ideal student,
Right.
uh,
Right.
but you cannot take the DNA that is in that
That's
classroom
right.
and embed it into that lesson plan. What are your thoughts about that, about
That's,
kind of the
I think,
limits of AI?
well, I think you just summarized it beautifully because the content could be presented in such a way that it's really engaging and and deep, rich content, but it's like you say, it's for an ideal student or an imaginary other. So it
Hmm.
could never have those principles of community. Because I think the things that I took away from the
Yeah.
UCSD program was that you have to really establish an overall community in the classroom, and the lessons need to engage the students where they are and take them to that next step, right? Really work within that zone of proximal development,
Yep.
so that they're not bored, so that they're learning and they're engaged. So it's
Yeah.
a sweet spot, right? Because if it's frustration level, then that's going to be a turn off for them as well. And AI
Yeah.
could not really, I don't, nothing that I've seen anyway would be able to make those kind of judgment calls.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that too, when you don't know that going into teaching or when you don't believe that,
Hmm.
can be a source of frustration, right? Because if
Right.
you feel like I lucked out, I have just one prep and I get to just repeat my lesson 5 times
Yeah.
in a day,
Yeah.
you're in for a hard
Yeah.
reality check because each of those lessons is going to go completely different. And by
That's
day two,
right.
your all 5 classes will be at a different point,
I'm so
in the
glad to hear you
sequence.
say that. As an elementary teacher, when people would talk about having only one prep, I'm like, oh,
Oh
really?
yeah. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, but
We had
but
six.
I mean, I think if you're good at teaching, one prep should feel like six because
It
it is
should.
six
That's
different
right.
environments, right?
Right.
And I think that
That's right.
those are all the things that um you can say it to a new teacher, and it
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
part of their learning experience prior to getting into the classroom, but until you're in it, um,
Yeah.
you face kind of that friction that comes with it isn't as easy, as they made it
No,
seem.
but that's also what keeps it interesting, because that was one thing that I
Yes.
used to talk with students about a lot, is that, you can have an easier job and probably make more money at an easier job, but, you might never have the amount of variety and excitement and all the different kinds of people. There's never a dull moment. Well, maybe
Or
some.
is it?
There's some. Just it's life. But
Yeah.
it's really it's a career in which every year, every class is going to be different. You
Yep.
know?
Yeah, and every position that you have,
Mhm.
whether you remain a teacher, whether you move into
Mhm.
coaching
Mhm.
teachers, whether you move into writing curriculum, there is it's an entire universe of
Mhm.
opportunities that you have, and there is, I truly believe, something for everyone
Mhm.
within education.
Yeah.
Again, not the most glamorous. You're not going to, be buying mansions on the work that we do here.
Right.
But on the day to day, if being stimulated is something you like,
Mhm.
this is the place for you. And that kind of leads us into how I like to wrap up these conversations because you just brought up a really great point, and I like to put guests in a scenario where suppose you have a teacher who is finishing, let's say, their second year. It's
Mhm.
June 1st, right? And they're coming to you, you're having dinner, and they're saying, I don't know that I'm going to come back next year. I may take a year off. I may look for, a different profession. Um, if you only had, a few sentences to share with that person, what is not necessarily something that will keep them in the profession, but just in
Mhm.
general advice that maybe you would have liked to have heard in that situation, what do
Hmm.
you think you would say?
Hmm. Wow, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Well, I think one of the things that it actually kind of happened to me that I was at a juncture like that,
Mm,
and a principal who I would probably never imagined being the principal that would do this, because this person wasn't particularly innovative, you know.
mhm,
But talked to me and said, well, what is it that makes you the happiest when you are teaching? What is it that excites you about it, and what would make you want to come back and explore? What would make you curious? And then he found a program actually at UCSD for the teachers, the writing project. That's how I first
mm,
got involved with the subject matter projects,
mhm,
and steered me toward the writing project. And so, I think what I took from that is he took the time to try to figure out what it was that engaged me, which was different than what engaged the teacher next door, my team partner. I had a partner teacher. And then, tried to help me access resources outside of the school itself, right? To keep that intellectual engagement alive. So,
uh,
maybe that's what I would start by is asking them, well, what is it that you have appreciated about teaching? What will you miss?
mhm.
Now, see, I'm still manipulating, aren't I? Um,
Yeah, well, but that's so important, right? Like, what is your anchor? I
mhm,
suppose is a
mhm,
good
mhm.
question, right? And it doesn't have to be within your school. It doesn't even have to be
No,
within your local community. Just what is
no.
something that keeps you
Mhm,
wanting to come
mhm.
back?
And maybe it will lead you away first, because I know
Yeah.
have talked to some people who, well, particularly, because language education was always a big part of my career. Maybe they decided to go and live in Mexico and really deepen their academic Spanish, or decided to go work in publishing for a year or something. Sometimes I did see them come back, and other times no.
Yeah.
But
And that's okay too, right?
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's important to think about as well, right? Because sustainability is not just when I talk about sustainability, it isn't just let's keep teachers in the profession. It's
right.
let's keep teachers who want to stay
Yes,
in the profession.
that's right. It's
Because
such an important distinction. Sorry to
right, because you
interrupt you.
have no, but it's I mean, you have folks that stay and sometimes stay for the wrong reasons
That's
and
right.
might not be great for kids, right?
That's exactly right. That was what motivated me to become a teacher. I hate to say it.
Yeah.
With some of those
Yeah.
people who I thought, they shouldn't have been there.
Right. And depending on the district setup, right, it gets to a point where it's tempting to stick
Yeah.
around and just kind of try to
Yeah.
automate your profession year after
Mhm.
year, not necessarily thinking about the students, but hey, this is a good
Mhm.
gig, got my retirement set up. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
cruise.
Well, and
Um,
I had a student teacher one time who was just not happy. I could see that this guy he was miserable. He wasn't
mhm,
enjoying anything he was doing. I think he thought, like, this is something I should do because he really
yeah.
wanted to contribute to society. So anyway, the person ended up, like, leaving the program, and wrote to me several years later and said that he was an attorney, had become an attorney, and was involved in educational law, and that
Um,
was so much more. He felt competent and excited, and he was still involved in education, but from a different portal. So I think you have a really good point that we want to provide the conditions that help people who really want to stay in teaching stay,
yeah.
because those are the people who sadly we're losing them too.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of the times it's because they're the ones that are kind of like
Hmm.
suffering in silence, right?
That's right.
I'm not gonna make a stink. I love what I do.
Right.
It's getting more and more challenging every day. I'm
Hmm.
just gonna quietly move away, even though I really want to
Exactly.
stay. Like
Quiet
that's who we're
quitting.
looking for. Quiet quitting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, Dr. Forbes, I can't thank you enough for the time that you gave me here today. It was really great connecting with you again. If I haven't thanked you enough, not just for your time today, but for working and maintaining an outstanding credentialing program when I was there and even after I left. Thank you
And
for
when you
all your
came back and
efforts.
worked with us.
And when I came back and worked with you for a little bit, um, thank you for all your efforts. Thank you for your career. And I appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful to your teaching journey, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube or through your favorite podcast platform. We also appreciate any and all reviews or comments you leave. Thank you for joining us today and tune in next week for our next episode.